Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be telling you about all of the books I read in March for the Irish Readathon. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who joined in with the readathon this year. We think that this is the year that we'd had the most engagement with the readathon. We think we were seeing more TBRs than ever, or even if people weren't doing full TBRs, they were kind of incorporating some of the readathon into their reading plans. I think we had more participation in the Discord than we ever had before. So just thank you so much for joining in with this, whether it is your first year or you're someone who's been with us for 7 years. Just thank you so much for always being the most enthusiastic participants. My reading across a month was a bit of a mixed bag. I did tons of reading before I left for my holiday, but for the last 10 days of the month while I was in America, I definitely wasn't reading to that pace, but there were some books that I did read while I was on holiday, and I love those books that I read on holiday because I feel like I always connect those books with those places, and we'll talk a little bit more about those connections that I feel as we get into talking about the books in more detail. This wrap up is coming to you a little bit later than I'd planned because just kind of the aftermath of coming back from America and life has come at me very fast. But I hope you don't mind. It kind of carries on the fun of the Irish Readathon for a little bit longer. One of my favourite books that I read in March was Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes. I've read quite a few Marian Keyes books now, but she has such a big back catalogue that I still have so many to read, and every time I read one of her books, it's just a complete joy. And this is probably her most well-known one, I'd say. Certainly one of her most well-known ones. And it is about, I think she's 27 or 28-year-old Rachel, who is living the high life in New York, going to glamorous parties, returning home in the early hours of the morning. But it actually turns out that Rachel has a really bad drug problem, and her family have decided to book her into this rehabilitation centre in Ireland. And Rachel is just so convinced that she doesn't have a problem whatsoever, and it's so fascinating to see the depiction of essentially kind of her delusion about her own condition. She has this perception of people who are addicts of being, a certain type of person that is very kind of stereotypical, and she doesn't see herself as being someone that fits that stereotype. She couldn't possibly be someone that is an addict. She has a completely kind of inaccurate, warped perception of herself, and in many ways she's such an unreliable narrator for that reason. But over the course of this lengthy novel where we're spending time with her, she starts to gradually realize the reality of her situation. And I was just so impressed by the way the author was able to craft Rachel as a character, to craft someone who is so flawed and for much of the novel totally lacks self-awareness, but she's still someone that you sympathize with and want to root for, and you want her to get better, and you want her to kind of come to terms with the reality of her situation and get her life back on track. I was also so impressed with the host of characters that were included in this book. Rachel's friend, her boyfriend, her family, all of the other people in the rehabilitation centre. They were such fleshed out characters, and this is one of the Walsh novels. So Marian Keyes has written several novels about this family, and I'm really going to enjoy the reading journey of reading the rest of the books from that family perspective and fleshing out that family even more. I had such a brilliant reading experience with this one. I think it's probably going to be one of my favourite reads of the year. And I immediately just wanted to read another Marian Keyes book. So I had a look at her kind of bibliography of all of the books that she'd read, and I had a couple of books on my shelves already from her. But I had decided that I basically now wanted to read them in publication order. So I picked up the next one that I hadn't read, and that is Lucy Sullivan is Getting Married. I think going into this one off the back of Rachel's Holiday, I was feeling a little bit disappointed in this one just because I wasn't loving it as much. But once I kind of got over that initial, I'd kind of come to terms with the fact it was not Rachel's Holiday, but it was still a very excellent book. Our main character is, of course, Lucy Sullivan, who is 26 years old. She's living in London. And I found it really interesting because even though, I don't know when this book came out, but I guess maybe 20 years ago or something like that, there's actually very little about that experience of being a person in your 20s 20s living in London. Her and her friends go to visit a psychic, and the predictions that they are given by the psychic start to come true. And the prediction that was given to Lucy was that she was going to get married within the year. So we're kind of following Lucy's romantic life as she goes out on various dates, finds herself in various like situationships, but we're also following the relationship that she has with one of her very close male friends. And Lucy is another character that in many ways really lacks self-awareness. She is so contradictory in her perspectives and her behaviors, and I don't think that's like the writing like not nailing her as a character. I think Marion Keyes actually knows this character so intimately, and the fact that she is so contradictory in her behaviors is just like reflective of her character. And I thought the dynamic between her and the male friend was just so true to life of so many of the kind of male-female friendships that are like that. Other aspects of Lucy's life that I found really interesting were the fact that her parents were Irish, but she, you know, was born and raised in England, and there is exploration of her connection to Irishness, or sometimes the lack thereof. And that was something that definitely rang true to me as well for people that I know, or some people that I know that have that background. Her relationship with her parents is also extremely complicated, and her relationship with her father, who he himself is the addict in this book. Lucy failing to come to terms with that for an extremely long time was so heartbreaking to watch. I think everything this book had to say about being a woman in your 20s trying to navigate the dating scene, and how often we can let so much bad behavior slide, particularly if you're really kind of fixated on finding the right person, and everything it had to say about complex familial relationships as well. I think it was just all handled and balanced so brilliantly, and I'm always just so impressed by how many balls Marion Keyes is able to juggle with her storytelling. So I really enjoyed this one, and honestly I just really want to pick up another one of her books like immediately. I also read Ashling and the City by Emer McLysa and Sarah Breen. This was actually the main book that I was reading while I was in New York. It is the fourth book in the Ashling series, which is a series I kind of have mixed feelings around. Like, it's the type of book that I might just kind of describe as like a candy floss book. Like, it's just entertaining, and then as soon as I finished it, I will probably like not think about it again. And I've actually read these books quite often on holiday, so I think it's really great for that, and particularly this one because the main plot of this book is Ashling going over to New York. So she was kind of living in New York while I was exploring the city, and she was mentioning kind of like certain places and locations and observations that I was recognizing in my travels. So that was really cool. And yeah, the main plot of this novel is Ashling is offered this amazing kind of events job in New York, and she takes the leap. She comes over to New York, has quite a complicated time like finding her feet in the city, getting to know people, finding somewhere to live. She starts dating in New York, so the novel explores that as well. But I think much of what this book is about is exploring kind of Irishness, and particularly the Irish American experience. And Ashling has quite a mixed experience with learning about Irish American culture. So some of the community around Irish culture, like that her aunt experiences, feels really kind of authentic and community based and fantastic. Then you have kind of the young American Irish people who feel like they don't actually really have any kind of understanding or connection to their Irishness. And they actually refer to people who are actually Irish as like greenies, I think is what they call people. And then you also have the American politician that Ashling ends up working with in her new role. And it explores how Irish American politicians can often kind of exploit or exaggerate their Irishness to get the Irish American vote. And I think that was quite a kind of nuanced topic that I wasn't really anticipating from this book. I mean, I do kind of think these books really fall into that category of like, and it's something I find really irritating, but you'll often see it on like red carpets and stuff when like the Irish media are talking to Irish celebrities, and they'll be like, oh my god, chicken fillet rolls, oh my god, spice bags and pints. And as someone who has left Ireland and lives in a different city. I live in London. I certainly understand the importance of like holding on to like Irish isms and finding your community, but just sometimes it goes a bit silly, and I think this book is part of that. When I read these books, I do feel like they are kind of often a little bit cliche, but I always have a good time reading them. So I read 2 books from Edna O'Brien as well, and I think I might be breaking up with Edna O'Brien because I didn't really enjoy either of these. So The Little Red Chairs. So this is about what happens when a man who calls himself a faith healer arrives in a kind of small rural west of Ireland community. He's very charismatic and everyone is kind of enthralled by him, but one of our female characters in particular is really taken in by that charm. And we're following the consequences of that and how kind of unexpected and unimaginable they are, and I was really bored, and I don't know if I have anything further to say about it. Like, so many of the reviews for this and like some of the stuff that's quoted on the back, and I mean obviously you're going to put positive quotes on the back of the book, right? But they're just talking about what an astonishing achievement it is and like what a masterpiece it is, and I'm like, what did I miss? Like, what did I just not pay enough attention? Has anyone else read this? Because can you tell me, am I wrong? Like, am I just really missing something? I have no thoughts on this. I mean, like, did I even read this? Like, I definitely did. I was there. I remember. And then we have Girls in Their Married Bliss, which is the 3rd book in the Country Girls series. And I really liked the first 2 books in this. We're following friends Kate and Baba and how their friendship evolves as they kind of move to different places and grow up, and how their friendships and their lives evolve over the course of many years. And this 3rd book is taking a look at their marriages. And I just found it so bleak and unhopeful, and I just sort of wish I wish I didn't read it in a way. And when you kind of compare it to the first book, when the girls are younger and they're full of this kind of optimism and hope and excitement for life, and their lives certainly aren't perfect, they are turbulent and there are upsets in those journeys, but just to find such dissatisfaction in their older life just was really depressing. Is this another one where I'm just missing something? Like, am I wrong? The other book for adults that I read was a non-fiction book, and that was Bad Bridget by Elaine Farrell and Leanne McCormick. So this book was fascinating, and I think if you enjoyed The Five by Hallie Rubenhole, you would really like this one. So this is a history book that takes a look at the lives of women who immigrated from Ireland to the US and explores how their lives were impacted and influenced by crime, how many Irish women who emigrated to America became criminals and the prisons were full of Irish women. And many of the events that are depicted in this book were based in New York as well. So this was another one that I found I finished it just before I went on holiday. So I found it really interesting to think about the context of Irish women in that city. So the time periods we're looking at are kind of the 18th and early 19th century. And some of the things that these women just got up to were like scandalous and shocking, but also so many of them were so clever in kind of finding a way to live in a kind of society that had set them up for failure, and they were living in like poverty. There was no kind of legal way of them making money, and they were just really clever in the way they figured out how to make ends meet. But also some of the things they got up to were very dastardly. I just thought this was a brilliant piece of kind of social history and true crime, and shows the lives of women that I never really thought of before. I spend a lot of my time thinking about the experiences of being an Irish woman, and I spent a lot of time thinking about what that means historically, but I've never really touched on what life was like for those women who left Ireland and went to America in that time period. And I was just so shocked that I didn't really know a lot of what was in this book at all. I'm quite keen to read more social history non-fiction, particularly if it's about women. So if you have any recommendations, please do leave it down in the comments. Oh, I read another nonfiction book as well. I read Disobedient Bodies by Emma Dabiri. So you may know this author from Don't Touch My Hair or What White People Can Do Next. I thought this was a really fantastic book. In this short book, although very thorough exploration, the author is looking at beauty and how we understand bodies in relation to beauty. We're specifically looking at women's bodies here and how that is kind of entangled with patriarchy and capitalism, how it's linked with kind of competitiveness and consumerism. And it really kind of dissects and analyzes how we as women have been socialized to fit certain beauty standards and how we might think the behaviors that we do to achieve beauty is something that we are kind of making a decision for ourselves, but kind of how much is that decision informed by patriarchy and consumerism. And I found it really interesting to read this not too long after I read You Could Be So Pretty, Holly Bourne's YA book. I mean, they're very kind of different books, but they are both kind of dissecting choice and beauty standards. I thought it was also really interesting the way the author touched on her experiences of growing up in Ireland and how that influenced her relationship with beauty and her own body image. The author is just so incredibly clever, and I think it's so impressive how she can take these really quite, complicated societal ideas and distill them into something that is really accessible and easy to understand. And she has a great way of also injecting her personality and humor into this as well. I think this is one that I'd really like to return to as well. And I think I'll probably return to it at various points in my life as my relationship with kind of my body and beauty shifts in, many years to come. Okay, let's stick with nonfiction to transition us into the books for some younger readers. I read Black and Irish, Legends, Trailblazers and Everyday Heroes by Leon Diop and Brianna Fitzsimmons, with illustrations by Jessica Louis. And this is one of those kind of books that are in a similar kind of vein to Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, where they're these brief biographies of significant people in a certain field. And this is specifically looking at, obviously, as the title says, people who are Black and Irish. I thought it was fantastic to see a range of different experiences depicted in this book, people from lots of different backgrounds and careers. Some of them are musicians or scientists, activists, actors, athletes, entrepreneurs. There's a range of careers or covered in this book, and I found it really interesting to see how their experiences of being Black in Ireland differed. Some of them had really negative experiences and some people had largely positive experiences, and there's a real spectrum of how people have experienced that. There were some people included in this book that I was really familiar with, but I didn't know kind of their whole life story and background, and I was learning stuff about them. But there was also some people in here that I'd never heard of before, and I found it really interesting to hear about their lives. And I just think this is a book that would be really impactful for younger readers. And I thought the illustrations that accompanied the book as well were really fantastic. I really love this style of books. I've actually read quite a few of them now, and I think they're just great ways to learn about something quite quickly and accessibly, and I thought this was really fantastically done. Okay, some young adult books. I read Vendetta by Catherine Doyle. A lot of the books that I read in the month have some sort of direct kind of Irishness to them. So the characters are Irish, or it's set in Ireland, or it's exploring some aspect of being Irish, or just even if it's not directly kind of dealing with it, it's certainly coloured by that experience. And this one had nothing to do with that, and it was really refreshing. It is set in Chicago, and we are following Sophie across what is meant to be this really quite dull summer. She is just kind of working away. Her dad has been sent to prison, and over the course of the novel, we come to realise that she doesn't really have the full context of that and what has really gone on. But it turns out the summer is not going to be dull when 5 mysterious brothers move into the neighborhood, and a chance encounter that she has with one of them really puts a spin on her summer. This is a mafia romance, which I'd never read one of those before, and I think I'm into it now. And some of my absolute favourite reads are the ones that I come away from with no thoughts, just good vibes. And that's how I feel about this book. I was just so thoroughly entertained. The chemistry between the two main characters is sizzling, loved it. The plot was thoroughly entertaining. And as soon as I finished reading this, I ordered the second book in the series because I need that entertainment again. I immediately needed to know what is going to happen next. Cannot recommend this highly enough. I was meant to read my proof of The Dagger and the Flame by Catherine Doyle in March, and I did start it, but I haven't finished it yet. So I will be talking about it at the end of April. Truth Be Told by Sue Divin. I read this mostly in one go on my train journey from Washington to New York. This is set in Northern Ireland in 2019, and we are following two main characters. We are following Tara and Faith, who both have really quite different upbringings. One of them has been born into a lot more kind of financial privilege than the other, and they are also on opposite sides of the political and religious divide in Northern Ireland. And neither of them have really had the experiences of putting themselves in someone else's shoes. You know, they've only really had influences from within their own communities on that political and religious perspective. One day, Tara and Faith end up meeting, and they realize that they look basically identical, which leads them down this path of learning more about their origins and their family background and the secrets that there are in both of their respective families. And I thought that plot was this phenomenal way of exploring how deep-rooted the conflict in Northern Ireland is, and how really devastating impacts on how people were divided and how innocent lives were brought into this conflict and innocent lives were lost. But also it shines a real light on how people do bad things but aren't always bad people, and how complicated morality is in circumstances of that kind of conflict. And while these girls are learning more about something that is very deep-rooted and complicated and historical like that, they're also just trying to figure out their own lives as teenagers and romantic relationships and sexuality. I really thought this was very accomplished. Tara was a character that I had so much fun spending time with, and Faith was a character that I had so much sympathy for. I thought this was a fantastic depiction of how a new generation can bring new hope, and the importance of patience and forgiveness and understanding, and how progress is really important, and progress doesn't need to be perfection either. I thought this book was really fantastic. I also read Grapefruit Moon by Shirley Ann McMillan. I read this in one sitting, and that was kind of what happened when I was on holiday. Like, I wasn't reading a little bit every day. I found myself, like, when I was moving around or maybe I was waiting for something, I had big chunks of time to read in, and that's when I was doing the reading. And I read this literally cover to cover in one go. And this is another book that looks at relationships across class divides. So we have Charlotte, who is very kind of wealthy and popular. And then we have Drew, who has joined her school and he lives in a council estate. The school he was in before was really quite different, and it's a big opportunity for him to be in this school. So he's really trying his best to make an impact and achieve stuff while he's there. And when he finds himself brought into this kind of like secret club called the Stewards Club, he faces a lot of really difficult moral decisions and divided alliances as part of that. And I think this book did a really fantastic job of showcasing the importance of male allyship and having men and boys who will advocate for women in front of other men in their life. And we see Drew fail to do that very often, but learn the importance of like calling other boys out on their bullshit. Because one of the people in the Stewards Club is Charlotte's ex-boyfriend, Adam. And Adam is like basically like terrorizing Charlotte. He has this video of them having sex that he is sending to her. He's really pressuring them to get back together. Charlotte really doesn't want to do that. And he is holding this video over her. And amongst all of those big, heavy topics and complications, Charlotte and Drew are trying to explore their connection together, and in a very kind of messy teenage way. It's real messy, especially with kind of like other people involved. And these two teenagers are just trying to muddle their way through life, but they're dealing with these big like grown-up things, and they're just trying to develop some kind of understanding about themselves, and they're just trying to do their best in life. And they go to poetry slams and they meet drag queens and they have this trip to Spain, and it's all them just kind of exploring and trying to figure it all out. I thought this book was just like really gutsy and really heartfelt, and I thought it was really fantastic. And the final book I'm going to talk about is Paper Dragons, They Fight for the Hidden Realm by Siobhan McDermott. This is a middle grade fantasy book where we are following our 12-year-old main character when she receives an offer to join this kind of like magical school academy that is underwater, and she has the chance to become immortal through this training. There are battles and dragon boat races. There are all of these challenges that the students at this school have to undertake. But there is this underlying kind of rumor about this emerging and growing dark force, and also students who fail their like trials or challenges end up disappearing. And it is up to our main character to try and uncover the truth and try to learn more about her own powers. I thought this was a really like solid middle grade fantasy, and I also loved how it brought in Chinese culture and Chinese mythology. I think that's something that I'd never read in a middle grade book before. And I think in bringing in those influences, it was just so creative. And you know, there are lots of books out there of like 12-year-old kids, magical schools, doing challenges, learning about their powers. But that Chinese mythology influence brought such a unique perspective that I hadn't seen before, and I would love to see more of in middle grade. And yeah, I have no notes. I just had a great time reading this one. So that is it. They are all of the books that I read in March. I didn't finish reading our group read, The Rachel Incident, until April. So I'm going to talk about that in my April wrap up. But I had read it before. It was a reread for me, so I was still able to like join in the chat about the novel. If you participated in the Irish Readathon, as I said, thank you so much for joining us. If you did participate, let me know down below what you read or the favourite book that you read was. I will be doing a video soon where I talk about kind of all the bookish stuff I picked up in New York and in Washington, and talking about the bookshops that I visited while I was there. Just please bear with me. Videos might be even more sporadic than usual at the minute. I've also acquired a fair few books recently, so I definitely need to do a like first quarter of the year haul. Anyways, that is it from me today. I hope you're doing well, and I will speak to you in my next video.